Chapter 65, Episode 65, Violent Avalanche 2. Jude and Cordelia simultaneously opened their eyes, but they did not stand up right away, because that action would have been too noticeable. It was clearly a calculative judgment on Jude's part, who considered the risk of exposure, and as for Cordelia, it was an instinctive action. Once again, the cries messed up their heads. Cordelia was in pain as she tried to cover her ears, and Jude was not much different either. "It's close, but it's beyond the wall." They had not immediately heard the cry, as it seemed like it came from beyond the wall or something. The cry that started once again did not stop. Jude and Cordelia eventually gave up waiting for it to stop, so they began to move while frowning. "Over there." Jude gestured with his eyes and hand before he quickly lowered his posture and began to cautiously move, and Cordelia nodded and followed after Jude. The two almost crawled on the floor, and then they stuck close to the rock wall before poking their heads out to see what was going on down there. It wasn't just a howl. To be exact, it was a scene where an evil power was making something scream in pain. At a basin on the mountain, there was a large crevice that ran through the center of the relatively flat summit. The crevice itself was wide and long, making it seem like there was a waterway on top of the summit. Moreover, it was not an ordinary crevice. A blue light flickered inside the crevice, and they also felt a powerful force there. And there was a creature screaming right next to such a crevice. It was a huge bear. A pure white bear that looked to be 5 meters tall was howling and tied to some chains, and a purple aura surrounded the body of such a white bear. Violent avalanche. It was the wild god that was mentioned by Great Storm. Jude and Cordelia's eyes met at that time, and the two nodded to each other. It was clear to them that it was Violent Avalanche who was howling. And as for those who made it cry in pain, near the center of the crack stood a gray-haired man with a pair of big horns on his head. He wore a black robe and held a staff decorated with skulls. The man was reciting a spell on a large magic circle, while several barbarian warriors were spraying blood from a large barrel inside the crevice. The blue light fluctuated every time the blood was sprayed around, and Violent Avalanche also let out terrible screams. And the violet aura increased and began to swallow Violent Avalanche. Something wicked was also mixed in its painful howls. Cordelia held her breath after hearing those desperate cries, and quickly hid herself under the rock wall. Jude also lowered himself and met Cordelia's gaze. Amidst Violent Avalanche's screams, the two began to talk. Zarakal, executive of the Devil's Eye. He's corrupting Violent Avalanche. That ceremony being held in the crevice, I've seen that before. Act 2 at the event that appeared at the last stage of the fight against the Northern Barbarians. Mineral vein, dragon vein. If we leave it as is, Violent Avalanche will be corrupted. We can't defeat Zarakal. He's a mid-ranking demonic human. We have no way of weakening him, unlike the Tomb Guardian. But we have to stop it. Their conversation stopped there for a moment, but it was really only for a short time. Do you remember the last stage of the event? You don't say. That. You want to do it in reverse. Let's do it in reverse. Crazy B** starred. Cordelia spat out a curse, but he could tell by looking at her eyes. Cordelia also knew that it was the only way. What about the means? Solari's holy lance. You're really crazy. So you don't like it? No, it's good. If they had to do it anyway, it's better to thoroughly do it. But will that really be okay? We can't help it, we have to stop them. It was at the moment that he spoke. Is there something that you can do? Then help, you have to stop them. They suddenly heard a third voice, and the two pointed a dagger and the moonlight in the direction where they heard the voice. Bear cub. It was a real bear cub. It was a white, small, and cute bear cub. So cute, Cordelia unconsciously said, and the bear cub then spoke with a look of urgency. I'm Violent Avalanche. That's my main body over there, and this one here is my clone that I hurriedly split from my main body. The two somehow had a rough idea of who the cub was, so instead of wasting time on unnecessary talk, Jude and Cordelia directly asked the cub. What are they doing? They're polluting the dragon vein. They intend to pollute all the dragon veins throughout the entire wild land, thereby depriving us wild gods of our power and corrupting the wild land itself. Dragon vein. It's a huge circular path of energy that was created by the wild gods. They are trying to contaminate that circular path. The power of the wild gods comes from the land, so if the dragon vein is polluted, the wild gods will also be polluted. The proof is my main body that they are trying to corrupt now. Violent Avalanche rapidly spoke as he panted, and Jude and Cordelia looked at each other again. Dragon vein. There was a similar word that came out at that time too. At that time in Legend of Heroes 2, the wild land had already been corrupted, and the pollution was already over, so what the players saw was only the flow of an evil energy that could no longer be called a dragon vein. However, the two could understand what the cub was talking about. It must be stopped at all costs. Although the dragon vein is vast, they are not active in my mountain only. If they pollute several sanctuary areas, the dragon vein will eventually be polluted. Are they spraying something like wastewater on the river? Cordelia briefly summarized it, and Jude nodded his head. Violent Avalanche, we are the ones who came here after receiving a request from Great Storm. Oh, Great Storm, that brat. We'll pretend that we didn't hear you. Moving on, we have to stop them, but the two of us are not strong enough to do so. Kuu, I understand. That horned man is really strong. He used a lot of strange spells to seal my strength. Since Zarakul was a mid-ranking demonic human, he was an overwhelming opponent for a wild god who was not worshipped because it didn't have a tribe that it took care of. But we still have to stop him. Yes, you are right. If this continues, I will also be corrupted and become their puppet. As Violent Avalanche was speaking so far, the screams of its main body was heard, so it begged Jude and Cordelia while its teeth chattered. You can do anything. I'll even throw my life away if you can stop them. So please stop them, please. The cub said it with a mind that was already grasping at straws. But at its words of you can do anything, Jude and Cordelia's eyes suddenly began to shine. Are you saying that you'll let us do anything? Can you do something then? At the same time that Violent Avalanche heard his question, it felt something like an ominous chill, but it immediately nodded. As a wild god, I'll allow it. You can do anything to stop them. Okay, the landlord has given us its permission. I feel less uncomfortable now. Jude and Cordelia exchanged a mysterious conversation with eye gestures and short words that only they could understand, and at that moment, their strategy meeting was finished. I'll say it again, but you're crazy. Do you hate it then if you said it again? No, it's good. Cordelia grinned as she bumped her fist on Jude's chest and said, Good luck, don't get hurt. You too. Jude likewise grinned before taking a deep breath. After he mentally prepared himself, he kicked off the ground. Yah! First of all, he shouted loudly to gain their attention. Even while Violent Avalanche was howling, Jude's cry was loud enough for them to notice his presence. Who the hell are you? Zarakul shouted some stereotypical lines as he turned to Jude, and the barbarian warriors quickly reacted too. They tossed the large barrel and grabbed their weapons. Jude was satisfied with their reaction. As he landed on the ground while covered in sacred battle aura, he used the 24 gale steps. Whirlwind! He deliberately shouted. At the same time, the whirlwinds he created were more than usual, thereby capturing the enemy's gazes. Fierce bull, you moron, don't let him interrupt the ceremony. After hurling an insult to Fierce Bull, Zarakul made a rough gesture, and the barbarian warriors rushed towards Jude. Their number was 8. They weren't just big, as all of them were also well-trained warriors. The strength of each and every one of them was comparable to the Knight Jun, who was with Jude in Lanjasthay. However, Jude focused on Zarakul instead of the barbarian warriors. All that Jude had to do was to draw the attention of not only the barbarian warriors, but also of Zarakul. Believe, 24 gale steps. Boom! Jude roughly kicked the ground. He ran head-on to the barbarian warriors as he rushed through the whirlwind. But his purpose was neither offense nor defense. At the gap between the barbarian warriors, He penetrated through that gap and passed by them like the real wind. Shower, whirlwind, gale. The surrounding air was shaken. Jude's rush was as smooth and as swift as an arrow, and he passed through the barbarian warriors at once. Bastard! Zarakol responded. He attempted to attack the rushing Jude by swinging the cane he was holding. And Jude once again broke Zarakol's thoughts. Boom! It wasn't an attack, but the sound of his kick on the ground. Instead of charging towards Zarakol, Jude hastily turned his body towards Violent Avalanche, and Zarakol widely opened his eyes. Because he realized Jude's purpose was Violent Avalanche. I will not let you. Zarakol spurred on the ground and rushed towards Jude. His momentum was terrifying, as he was a mid-ranking demonic human. At that moment, Jude popped the pouch he was carrying in his arms. A terrible smell spread throughout the place as it got carried by Jude's whirlwinds. No matter how powerful a demonic human or even the trained warriors, they were helpless against their sense of smell. Zarakol and his subordinates' movements were immediately blocked by the odor bomb that Jude had also used on the Fury Wolf, back then in the dungeon book. Boom! Jude kicked the ground again. He then ran back to the direction where he came from, and the struggling Zarakol roared in anger as he summoned a strong wind that swept the surrounding area. As soon as the stench was cleared, he rushed again towards Jude. You slippery bee *starred. The barbarian warriors also turned to Jude. And Violent Avalanche was watching the entire spectacle through a gap between the rocks, before he repeatedly stamped its feet. What are you doing? Why? Jude's plan to awaken its main body failed. Jude's movements were amazing, but that was not enough to defeat Zarakol and his subordinates. Violent Avalanche was in tears as it turned its gaze to the side and shouted, Hey, you said you'll do anything. The cub's voice weakened at the end, because Cordelia, who was with it just then, had disappeared. End away. Did she run away? Did she abandon her lover too? It wasn't. At the time when Violent Avalanche was surprised, and everyone's eyes were on Jude, Cordelia was also running. It's a feint. As soon as Cordelia reached the magic circle that was created for the ceremony, Zarakol quickly shouted. He hurriedly turned towards Cordelia. Don't stop my ceremony. They tried to draw the enemy's attention and then destroy the magic circle. It was a reasonable deduction, but it was not the correct answer, because what the two rotten waters had thought of was more than that. Cordelia used the witch transformation and threw her body towards the magic circle. She poured the witch's mana into the Solari's holy lance that she held in one hand and stared at only one point. It was at the land where the magic circle was, and not the magic circle itself. She stared at where the dragon vein was being polluted. At the crack in the crevice. No way. Stop. It was not only Zarakol who cried, but Violent Avalanche too. Because of what Jude and Cordelia were trying to do. In the last stage of Act 2's event, the desperate Zarakol tried to die with the player together. He flooded the dragon vein with a strong power. As a result, it caused a huge earthquake and destroyed the surrounding area. It was a dragon vein. And this was a mountain. What would happen if a dragon vein was filled to the brim with power? No. Stop. But it was too late. Cordelia raised Solari's holy lance as she filled it with the witch's magic, before she shouted with an enraptured smile. Art is an explosion, F*ck bang. Tien Kwang can mean bang and boom in Korean. I wanted to use boom because it was more of an explosion sound, but bang seemed to be intentional on the author's part. Intentional as in its lewd connotation in English when you combine the F word with bang. I'll continue using F*ck bang instead of F*ck boom, unless you guys gals disagree. She then threw the holy lance towards the dragon vein. She chanted the spell and invoked Solari's power in the holy spear. Barang! It burst. It exploded. The ground shook and Zarakol's face turned deathly pale. Violet Avalanche also collapsed onto the floor. And the dragon vein was completely filled with power. The blue light fluctuated greatly without stopping and began to shoot up to the sky. Dozens to hundreds of small cracks spread throughout the crevice. The whole rocky mountain shook like crazy. Crazy B asterisk TCH. That was it. Zarakol could no longer see Cordelia, because the rocky mountain began to collapse. Azura. Help! My mountain, my mountain. The last cry belonged to Violent Avalanche. While everyone was focused on Cordelia, Jude ran like crazy and suddenly appeared on Violent Avalanche's side as he grabbed the back of its neck. As if he was lifting a kitten, he lifted the clone of Violent Avalanche and climbed onto the wooden board. The rocky mountain fell apart and collapsed while Violent Avalanche was screaming. Fierce Bull's group, who was in the middle, could not escape from the sudden disaster. They couldn't do anything as the whole rocky mountain collapsed from the summit to the middle part. Azura. The screams of the barbarian warriors were buried in the roaring sounds. The pollutants they used for the dragon vein were also destroyed from the explosion of the runaway dragon vein. Crash Ruyumbal crash. The rocky mountain that was hundreds of meters in height was collapsing. Many things disappeared in that endless roar. The magic circle for the ceremony, the contaminated blood, Zarakol, the barbarian warriors, and even the main body of Violent Avalanche. As Violent Avalanche let out a devastated voice, Jude stretched out his hand to the dense cloud of dust that rose up, and there was someone who held his hand. Cough, cough, fine dust is bad. At the moment of explosion, Cordelia had soared up to the sky with fly magic. Covered in dirt, Cordelia coughed and said that, as Jude helped her sit on the wooden board. She then smiled. F***ck bang. Because art is an explosion. Good jobs, Cordelia. Praise me more and more. As usual, the two exchanged words that only they knew and then refreshingly smiled at each other, while Violent Avalanche shuddered in various ways at the sight of the two exchanging smiles after the atrocity of toppling down the mountain. And rings of pure white light rose around the bodies of Jude and Cordelia. 2 rings. 2 rings. There were 2 rings of light. One was because of the unexpectedly many people who were lying in wait to ambush them on the mountain. The second was because of those in the middle of the crevice. A terrifying roar of anger burst out beneath their feet. Jude and Cordelia looked down, and Violent Avalanche widely opened its eyes. Zarakol stood up as he pushed aside the big rocks. He was already in his demonized form, and he stood tall at 3 meters and had abnormally developed muscles that reminded them of a monster than a human. This fiendish B** stards, what the hell did you do? I can't believe that you broke down the entire mountain. Violent Avalanche secretly agreed to Zarakol's pent-up cry that he let out, but Jude and Cordelia did not care about it. Rather, they were thinking like demons. Doesn't he look normal? He was hurt a lot. One of his horns is broken. His mana got twisted when he quickly turned into his demonized form. In order to survive at the moment, the mountain collapsed. His injuries are severe. His whole body is covered in blood. It was an indifferent analysis. His power was halved, or rather, the current Zarakol's power reduced by more than half. Should we beat him up when he's all beat up? Whether he can no longer use his powers, weak, defenseless, or took hold of a weakness or hostage, we'll still do it. Wows, you're like a real devil. Do you hate it then? I love it, it's my style. Jude and Cordelia looked at each other again and laughed, before they put down Violent Avalanche on the wooden board and used fly magic to land gently in front of Zarakol. Let's start the boss fight now. The boss fight starts at phase 3. What? It was when Zarakol and Violent Avalanche were bewildered together. Jude and Cordelia didn't spoke anymore. The two forcibly began the boss fight. Chapter 66, Episode 66, Violent Avalanche 3. For the overlords of hell, besides their personality and magic, they also had their own distinct characteristics, depending on their physical appearance. Because of this, demons and demonic humans also had different physical appearances, depending on the overlords they served. The symbol of Asmodeus, the overlord of lust, is a beast. That was why Asmodeus' followers take the form of an animal beast. The demonic monster that guarded the sealed witch's soul resembled a giant gorilla, and Saluzia, who was a high-ranking demonic human, had a deer's antlers and the wings of a winged animal. An unparalleled powerful monster, a beast that doesn't get exhausted. In addition, Asmodeus, the overlord of lust, was also a swordswoman. According to the Devil Book of the Solari denomination, which predated the Guardians of the Holy Cross, she was the greatest swordmaster in hell. She was an overlord with a beautiful appearance and beautiful sword movements. Her appearance while she moved her sword was so beautiful that there were stories about how the enemies she fought had lost their will to fight because of their lust. But Belial is different. You could say that he's the exact opposite. Belial, the overlord of corruption. His appearance was so terrible looking that it was difficult to describe it. For this reason, the Devil Book referred to Belial as similar to Asmodeus, that both of them should not be directly seen. Because Asmodeus' seductive beauty made her enemies go crazy with lust, while Belial was so gruesome and disgusting that it made his enemies lose their minds the moment they faced him. If Asmodeus is a beast, then Belial is an insect. Belial, also known as the Lord of the Flies, had an insect appearance just like his nickname. Therefore, his demons and demon followers also had forms close to insects when they used his power. "I'll crush and trample you, I'll make you beg me to kill you." As Zarakal shouted in an angry voice, his appearance rapidly changed. His horns and huge body remained the same, but a hard shell formed all over his skin, and his face also changed in an instant. His eyes became that of a dragonfly's large compound eyes, and transparent wings that were unique to insects sprouted from his back. His mouth also turned like that of an insect's, making him look hideous. As expected of a mid-ranking demonic human. Low-ranking demonic humans did not have much changes in their appearances even in their demonized forms, but for mid-ranking demonic humans, the distinct characteristics of their overlords were vividly revealed. He's been weakened, though. His injuries were severe. Though his appearance had completely changed, it was not intact. The shell that covered his whole body was broken everywhere, and one of his leg pairs that grew between his waist was completely missing. Judging from the way he dragged his right leg, it seemed that he was having difficulties in walking too. And it was at that moment, while Jude was calmly examining Zarakal's condition, Cordelia had a completely different thought. Die disgusting. She had thought that it was disgusting back when it was still a game, but it was even more disgusting now that she had seen it in person. She found the boss disgusting, so she honestly wanted to run away rather than to fight. It was as if that showed up in her room. Tien, that refers to cockroach, hahaha. Moreover, Zarakal began doing something more gruesome. The great overlord of corruption will punish you. When Zarakal loudly shouted, dozens of holes appeared all over his body. Cordelia's face turned pale in fright at that gruesome sight to the point where she couldn't even scream, and Jude instantly flinched and couldn't move from his spot. But what happened next was more shocking. Chi-era. Flying insects poured out from the holes in Zarakal's body. The hundreds of insects that poured out were so many that they made a loud noise in the air as they formed a huge cloud of bugs. "Go eat them clean." As Zarakal shouted in high spirits, the insect swarm that looked like flies rushed towards Jude and Cordelia. It didn't matter if the insects were small, but their clearly gruesome appearance made someone act recklessly. Jude quickly came to his senses, and as he tried to evade, he saw Cordelia. On the other hand, Cordelia reflexively chanted a spell the moment she saw the swarm of insects. Fireball. A huge fireball that contained an excessive amount of the witch's magic rushed towards the front. The fireball exploded the moment it collided into the insect swarm. Boodawam. It was quite a big explosion. It caused some of the swarms of insects that soared and covered the sky to disappear. But Zarakal didn't lose his composure. "Ha, you can only do that much." Zarakal exclaimed. Instead of moving himself, he called out more swarms of insects. Numerous insects emerged through the heat of the flames. Kyra. Cordelia eventually screamed. She already knew about Zarakal and thought that it would be fine if he looked a little disgusting because she had defeated him dozens to hundreds of times in the game, but the reality was different. There was a difference in viewpoints, as she had never encountered hundreds of bugs in real life compared to when it was just a game. Cordelia. Jude cried out, At the same time, he used 24 gale steps and drew closer to Cordelia. "Chant the spell," Jude yelled as he simultaneously grabbed Cordelia on her waist and carried her away from the insect swarm. Several whirlwinds rose and created a dizzying wind, which then shook off some of the flying insects. She needs time to adapt. Even though he had been through all sorts of hardships, Jude found himself in a tough spot as he couldn't even punch those bugs, so Cordelia's reaction was quite understandable. But no matter how gruesome it was, she would eventually get used to it if she kept looking at it. So for now, he had to buy some time and focus on evading. However, he was wrong. He didn't have to do that. It wasn't because Cordelia suddenly adapted to the reality before her eyes. She still had a white face and was on the verge of crying. But something else had already been triggered and overpowered her feelings of fear and disgust. Cordelia's fighting instinct, which Jude himself had admired several times, had already been triggered the moment she faced the enemy. Flames shot up from both of Cordelia's hands as it reached the whirlwinds that Jude created. At that moment, Jude understood what Cordelia's instinct was trying to do, and the conclusion that she instantly reached while bypassing the process. "I think I know what to do, let's do it." Thud! Jude kicked the ground. As if traversing space, he distanced himself from the insect swarm at once, and after he immediately let down Cordelia in a fairly high place, he charged towards Zarakal. Come here if you can." A purple aura rose from Zarakal's whole body as he loudly shouted. He was a powerful warrior before he had become an insect master. But Jude didn't run to him. He kept running around Zarakal, as if he was drawing a circle with Zarakal at the center. "Your trek is useless. Are you thinking of hitting my back after making me dizzy?" Zarakal mockingly laughed at Jude. Hundreds of insects swarmed and completely covered him and his back. But it was all according to Jude's plan. "Cordelia!" Jude called out. Cordelia responded immediately. The witch's black flame was ignited and burned in the air. Hiss! The flame burned. It was a small flame, but the wind caught it. It was the whirlwinds that Jude had created. The ones that began to rotate following Jude's movement. "Great storm, help me." Cordelia raised her arms high, and then there was a strong glow from the golden tattoo on her left arm. She began to manipulate the flow of the whirlwinds that Jude had already created, and the new ones that he was creating too. It was the blessing of the wind. Swoosh! The whirlwinds merged into one. Those that were already rotating along a certain trajectory had merged and became a huge whirlwind. Mori. Jude increased his speed. Whirlwinds continued to be created with his 24 gale steps. Thus, the whirlwinds increased and added to the huge whirlwind. And this huge whirlwind became more and more powerful under the control of Cordelia. Finally, it became a tornado. The great tornado tore the air apart, and Zarakal's insect swarm couldn't properly fly. And the black flame burned in the wind. It quickly spread and became one with the wind. The tornado was reborn as a massive fire tornado. "Yah!" Jude cheerfully exclaimed as he moved away from the tornado. He could tell. It wasn't just Jude and Cordelia who moved. Violent Avalanche, who was high up in the sky, was also adding power to the tornado. Although Violent Avalanche had been weakened, this land was still its sanctuary. The power of the wild god who ruled the sanctuary was added to the flames and wind, and the fire tornado's burning power became terrifyingly powerful. It was impossible for Cordelia alone to create such a massive fire tornado. The fire tornado completely trapped Zarakal. Hundreds of insects were instantly turned into ashes, and the nearby snow melted away at once. The released heat was so intense that it was difficult to breathe near the fire tornado. Jude stopped running. After Cordelia saw and confirmed that Jude was at a safe enough distance, she once again shouted with all her might. F***ck bang. The first one was an explosion. The second one was another explosion. The fire tornado's swirl of flames swallowed Zarakal. The dancing black flames choked Zarakal from all sides, as if the tornado itself squeezed him with two hands. Zarakol's scream was buried by the roaring sound of the wind. The mountain debris was sucked by the tornado and turned into fearsome blades that ruthlessly tore and crushed Zarakol's body. The witch's black flames set him on fire. Amazing. It was spectacular. Though they were at a considerable distance, their bodies could feel the tremendous heat. Jude unwittingly admired it as he smiled in astonishment, while Cordelia increased the mana she used even more, as her dark red hair fluttered like flames. Finish! Cordelia shouted as she widely stretched out her arms to the side. At that instant, the fire tornado let out a final roar. Barang! The flames exploded. After a while, the tornado disappeared, and the air fluctuated once more as the wind blew in all directions, and the terrible heat intensely melted all the snow on the surface. Whoosh! And Zarakol's figure was revealed. His whole body was broken and burned to the point that his figure was unrecognizable, and afterwards, his body literally fell apart. As he had already suffocated from the flames, his body immediately became ashes and scattered around. You have acquired the title, the one who defeated a mid-ranking demonic human. When fighting against demonic humans, all stats are increased by 1%. A voice came into their heads. At the same time, rings of light surrounded the bodies of Jude and Cordelia. There were 3 for Jude and 4 for Cordelia. Hi. Cordelia's shoulders drooped as she let out a sigh. Her nose then bled, and both of her legs weakened. But Cordelia did not fall to the ground. Instead of falling to the ground, she found herself on Jude's arms, who had suddenly rushed to her side. You worked hard, my princess. Our combo was good. Cordelia raised her thumb as she buried herself in Jude's arms, and Jude fixed her position as he carried her in his arms before he looked up at the sky. He smiled towards Violent Avalanche, who was looking down from the wooden board. You can be at ease now. They have been punished for destroying the sanctuary. You're the ones who destroyed the sanctuary, you too. Chapter 67.1, Episode 67, 1-2, Violent Avalanche 4. The battle was over. Not only did they defeat the wicked mid-ranking demonic human Zarakol, who tried to contaminate the dragon vein, but they also defeated all of the Angry Bull's corrupted warriors that Zarakol led. After receiving some medical treatment, Cordelia said with a beautiful smile, You can be at ease now. They were punished for destroying the sanctuary. You're the ones who destroyed the sanctuary, you too. Sweet. It didn't work. Cordelia clicked her tongue and pouted her lips, and Jude spoke with a business smile. Violent Avalanche, the situation was so urgent that we couldn't help it. Although the sanctuary was partially damaged, we defeated the enemy and protected the dragon vein. Partially is this partially. The mountain has not completely collapsed. Cordelia lightly said, and Violent Avalanche held the back of his neck and then staggered. It was a dainty bear cub, so even though it had that reaction, it still looked cute. UHUHMY blood pressure. Fortunately, it's a rocky mountain. If it had been an ordinary mountain, countless animals would have died when the mountain collapsed. Jude then approached such a violent avalanche and said in a friendly manner, Regardless, we defeated those guys. That's right, we defeated them and saved Violent Avalanche and the sanctuary. Jude and Cordelia said in succession, and Violent Avalanche knit its brows, because it couldn't somehow understand their suggestive words. We defeated not only the mid-ranking demonic human, but also the fallen barbarian warriors. Jude is right, if not for us, the dragon vein would have been polluted, and you would have been corrupted too. Just imagine it, wouldn't it have been terrible if that happened? They were silently pressuring Violent Avalanche. No, they were pressuring Violent Avalanche with gentle words. Violent Avalanche involuntarily stepped back as the good-looking couple came closer, or rather, it finally realized what the two were asking for. Are you asking for a reward? Reward rather than that, isn't it reasonable for us to be compensated? Give and take. Great Storm was a wild god who properly compensated us. That's right, he gave us this and that. Cordelia gently tapped the wind's wing arrow, and then pointed to the tattoo on her left arm. Then Violent Avalanche grumbled as it tried to resist. The mountain collapsed. The mountain has not completely collapsed. It was a necessary sacrifice. Everyone will remember this noble sacrifice. The everyone that they referred to were Jude, Cordelia, and Violent Avalanche who were present here, but Violent Avalanche had a feeling that perhaps it was only referring to Violent Avalanche itself. I can't help it. In any case, it was true that without Jude and Cordelia, the dragon veins would have been contaminated, and Violent Avalanche itself would have been corrupted. It was natural to give them a reward, since they were Violent Avalanche's benefactors, who saved more than its life. But children, I lost my main body, and the sanctuary has been destroyed. The dragon vein had indeed avoided contamination, but I greatly suffered. Yes, I understand, Cordelia said as if she sympathized with him, and Violent Avalanche clicked his tongue this time. And Jude's thought. As expected, the divine items remained safe. Just as how Great Storm had the wind's wing arrow, Violent Avalanche also possessed some divine items. As Jude had expected, Violent Avalanche plopped down on the ground and began to talk as it looked at Cordelia. Because I do not have a tribe that I look after, I do not have any divine items that are good for human use like that Great Storm brat. I don't have items like weapons or armor. I understand. The reason why Great Storm created a divine item like the wind's wing arrow was to give it to the Great Storm tribe, and not to use it for himself. So it would be strange if Violent Avalanche, who did not care for any tribe, had weapons or armor that were suitable for human use. So I'll give you this. The sitting Violent Avalanche dug a little on the ground, and a large blue gem suddenly appeared. This is freezing stone. Wow, that came from here. Freezing stone. It was a beautiful gem made by combining mana and the cold yin energy. But it wasn't just beautiful, because the freezing stone stored frozen time inside it. In other words, it is one of the main ingredients for the ancestral regression technique. It was an ingredient that could only be obtained after a lot of hard work, so they were really lucky to obtain it here. You're lucky. Jude nodded his head, while Cordelia giggled and hugged to her chest the freezing stone that Violent Avalanche gave them. It's pretty, thank you, Violent Avalanche. Well, I'm glad that you like it. After all, Cordelia was really pretty. Although she didn't wear makeup because they had slept outside and traveled for several days, Cordelia's cheerful smile still resembled that of a goddess. Of course, since Violent Avalanche was a bear, its aesthetic perception was somehow different from humans, but Violent Avalanche was the kind of being that would marvel at the sunset that heralds the night and be captivated by the glorious dawn in the morning. Violent Avalanche warmly smiled and shrugged its shoulders, and Jude smiled too, before he stepped forward and said, I think we should discuss about the next thing now. You said that they were trying to pollute the dragon vein, but could you please elaborate about that a little more? Of course. It's a really big crisis. It's a problem that all wild gods know, all living beings in the wild land must deal with together. Violent Avalanche strongly shouted as it jumped from its spot, and Jude nodded. He then faced Violent Avalanche with a serious expression and said, The Angry Bull tribe is believed to have been corrupted. It seems that a demonic human from a group of demon followers called Devil's Eye was behind it. Wait, how did you know that? Violent Avalanche roughly knew about demon followers, but it didn't know about which tribe or group they belonged to, so it widely opened its eyes and asked. Jude then briefly introduced their history. We came to the wild lands at the request of the Guardians of the Holy Cross, because they received information that the Devil's Eye were showing signs of disturbing movements. Furthermore, the Witch's Soul and the Fairy Queen warned us about the threat in the north. Oh, in reality, Violent Avalanche did not know much about the Guardians of the Holy Cross. It also knew very little about the Witch's Soul and the Fairy Queen. But that was also why Violent Avalanche felt reassured. Just as an unknown threat came, an unknown help also came. And Cordelia's thought, wow, as expected of a scammer. When they were inside the border, he eagerly used the wild god's name, and as soon as they crossed the border, he used the name of the Witch's Soul and the southern organizations this time. I think he'll succeed even if he tried to sell umbrellas in the desert. Cordelia really thought that it would be possible if it was Jude, so she unconsciously let out a laugh. Because he's my Jude. She felt that he was reliable. And at that same time, when Cordelia was smiling while watching Jude having a serious conversation with Violent Avalanche, a similar situation was occurring near the border. Chapter 67.2, Episode 67.2.2, Violent Avalanche 4. The Great Wall is, as its name implies, a great wall. It is so huge that it cannot be fully monitored. Furthermore, the Great Wall wasn't built in a straight line on a flat ground, as if one was drawing a line on a map. In reality, the terrain was complicated. There were mountains and valleys everywhere, and even in places where there were no rivers and forests, the ground was rugged. Thus, the Great Wall was built in a form that conformed with the natural terrain, so it was natural that the wall had several blind spots. In the end, people are needed to guard the wall. That way, they can easily notice a massive invasion before it reaches the wall. However, watching over the entire wall is almost impossible in the first place, because only a few people are guarding it. It wasn't just the words of anyone else, but were the words of Count Bayer's successor, whose family held the Margrave position in the past for many years. He is reliable. It was not just because of his family's origins. The moment he found out that Jude and Cordelia had crossed the border, Gar-L's attitude regarding this matter changed. It wasn't because he was not serious about this matter before. He was already serious about it, but up until now, Gar-L had been following Adelia rather than taking the lead. But it was different now. He was taking the initiative and trying to resolve the situation. He looks like an expert. Gar-L's explanation about the Great Wall and the jackdaws made him look like an expert. Perhaps that's the reason why Gar-L appeared to be strikingly handsome than before. He was handsome in the first place, though. She didn't like Jude's personality or any other side of his, but Adelia at least admitted that he had a beautiful face. He looks too weak, though. Nevertheless, the expression of good-looking perfectly suited Jude. Gar-L was Jude's older brother, and the brothers were alike each other. However, Gar-L was the very picture of health itself. Moreover, he was a master of the sword, and was regarded by everyone to have inherited the title of Great Swordmaster from Count Bayer, one of the 10 great swordmasters. In addition to having a strong physique, he had an appearance that resembled Jude but minus the weakness, so it was unavoidable for him not to look handsome. No, this isn't the time for this. This wasn't the time for her to evaluate Gar-L's appearance. After all, Gar-L was now explaining how to cross the border with a very serious face. I apologize, but we have to abandon our horses. It can't be helped. If someone else had said it, Adelia would have argued about finding another way instead of abandoning the horses, but now she unconsciously nodded her head. Because Gar-L's words were reliable. If this man said so, it must be true then. At Adelia's reply, Gar-L was somehow a little surprised, but he soon had a small smile and said, "It's going to be quite a difficult journey." The journey has been tough even up to now. You do know how many days we've been running on horseback, right? I do know. Ever since they left home, they had been running on horseback every day until they had reached this place. Running on horseback was a lot harder than most people think. It was severely physically exhausting, and it was seriously painful on the buttocks and thighs. But the two had run every day for more than 10 days. It was a forced march of such difficulty that it would make most ordinary knights cry. However, Gar-L unconsciously looked at Adelia. They had come this far, but she had never once said that it was difficult. It wasn't because it was easy. It was hard. Gar-L himself found it difficult, so it would be more serious for Adelia, who's a wizard and a woman too. But she never once said that it was hard. She had a strong will. She endured the hardships in order to fulfill their mission. It's the first time. It was the first time that he met a noble lady like her. Of course, he had met a few knights with a similar disposition, but Adelia was first and foremost a wizard. There was a difference from those who had trained to become knights since their childhood. Beautiful. He had first thought that she was fierce, but she somehow looked different now. She was like a sparkling gem who held a strong will. Even though she was always frowning, Adelia was still a very beautiful woman. Just as Gar-El was Jude's brother, Adelia was Cordelia's older sister. Gar-El? Adelia asked Gar-El at that moment as she looked up at him. It was natural for her to do so, since the height difference between the two was close to 20 centimeters. But in that instant, Gar-El unconsciously averted his gaze, because his heart was beating a little fast. How long has it been? The reason why Gar-El himself had not been married, even when he was in his late 20s. He had lied to others, saying that he had a lady in his heart, but in fact, there was a real reason. Count Bayer also knew of the reason, so he didn't pressure Gar-El into getting married. Gar-El, are you sick? No, it's not, it's just a little fever. Gar-El lightly answered, as he shook his head and got rid of his thoughts. What was important now was to catch up to Jude and Cordelia. He only had to think about that for now. I don't know much about the land of the barbarians, so I will trust in Lady Adelia's decision in the future. He was referring to the tracking magic in Count Chase's ring. Adelia nodded her head and said, "Don't worry, I'll definitely get the job done, and if it's the sword of Lord Gar-El, I'm sure it would be reliable even in the land of the barbarians." Adelia quickly spoke, and at that moment, the two were simultaneously a little embarrassed. Gar-El was surprised when he heard Adelia's words. He would, of course, since his heart had always been pounding ever since he met Adelia. "It's an honor for me to receive your trust. I shall do my utmost best to protect Lady Adelia." "Let's go quickly." Adelia hurriedly turned her eyes, as she somehow found it difficult to gaze at Gar-El's bright smile, and Gar-El stepped forward full of confidence as he had always been. And at that same time, in a place that was far down in the south. What, didn't it go well at first? Inside Count Chase's study, a handsome young man with long platinum hair stood in front of his father after a long time. He was Edward Chase, Count Chase's eldest son and heir. After Edward said that, Count Chase knit his brows. "Isn't that good for her?" "No, I must meet them first, if it's Adelia." Adelia was the best among the three siblings when it came to their talent for magic. But maybe because of that, or maybe because she resembled her father the most among the three, she has never had a relationship with the opposite sex since her childhood. Such a thing as eloping was something that Adelia wouldn't likely do, but if she had indeed did that, shouldn't they welcome it with open arms then? There's no problem if the other person is Gar-El. He was handsome and competent, he came from a good family, and he also had a nice personality. He was certainly perfect. In Edward's personal opinion, he honestly found Gar-El to be too good when compared to Adelia. Of course, that is if the two really eloped. Contrary to the concerns of Count Chase and Count Bayer, Edward perceived Gar-El and Adelia's loss of contact to be different in nature compared to their youngest siblings. There must be a reason. Although she was bold, or rather, even aggressive, he thought that Adelia wasn't a child who would do things without thinking. Moreover, she was even with the prudent Gar-El, so if they had cut off their contact, there must have been a reason that they did that, and not because it was an elopement or something similar. Whatever it is, we can't just leave it as is. Gar-El and Adelia had gone missing after Jude and Cordelia. The rumors in high society was only a secondary problem. The most important thing was to secure the safety of the two couples. Gar-El and Adelia should be all right, the problem would be Jude and Cordelia. Some people have already evaluated Gar-El's sword skills as close to the level of the 10 great swordmasters. In addition, Adelia was one of the heads of the Royal Guard Magic Corps, so it was highly unlikely that the two would be in danger. But Jude and Cordelia's situation was different. They had to secure the safety of the two as soon as possible. "Should I set off too? Count Bayer doesn't have a daughter, so you won't be losing your contact with me." At Edward's joking words, Count Chase shook his head. "I've already prepared for the chase. You focus on training. I've said that it's very important, but it's also important for you to reach the next circle." "I understand." Edward obediently accepted his words and bowed before he tried to go out. But it was at that moment. "By the way, Edward." "Yes, father." "Did you not get along with that Gar-El fellow when you were a kid?" We are still relatively close these days. Edward had few people whom he could call as friends, and Gar-El was one of the first among them, whom he could count as a friend. I see, then do you know what Gar-El likes? I'm saying this just in case, so that we'll be prepared for any situation. Edward quietly stared at his father speaking with a stern face, and then frowned. However, he didn't think of this situation too deeply as he always did. At Count Chase's request, Edward began talking about the things that Gar-El preferred. Chapter 68, Episode 68, MISSED 1. Terms used in this chapter. The person near the ink will become black, a Korean idiom which means that if you are close get along with bad friends, you will likely become bad like them. In short, a good person will become bad if they hang around with bad people. It is slightly similar to one rotten apple spoils the barrel, but in this idiom's case, the subject is the already bad person who turns good people into doing bad too. I'll explain what the dragon vein is first. Having heard about the story of the guardians of the Holy Cross and the witch's soul, Violent Avalanche had a face like that of a seasoned veteran. Violent Avalanche had been worried on what to do given its very desperate situation, but unexpectedly, a helping hand came and relieved its worries. First of all, you two should sit down, it's going to be a long story. Violent Avalanche tapped on the spot next to it, before it slightly wriggled its butt to move into a more comfortable sitting position. Cordelia sat next to Violent Avalanche, who was like a teddy bear, while Jude sat opposite them. The dragon vein is a stream of divine power that flows throughout the entire wild land. Does the dragon vein exist only in the wild lands? Violent Avalanche nodded at Cordelia's question. Yes, the truth is the dragon vein was originally called the Lee Line, and these Lee Lines were spread out all over the entire continent, or rather, throughout the entire planet. However, the wild gods used their powers on a portion of these Lee Lines for quite some time to create what we call the dragon vein now. In short, they removed some of the original infrastructure and upgraded it. Cordelia asked again, is the dragon vein something like the wild gods' source of power? Not entirely. However, it is true that us wild gods have our strength increased when we are near the dragon vein. The land where the dragon veins flow is what we call our sanctuary, and when we leave our sanctuary, we lose our connection with the dragon vein, and our strength also weakens. Does that mean that it's difficult for the wild gods if they lose the dragon vein? It's not completely difficult. It's completely difficult, but there are also some strong wild gods who do not completely rely on the dragon vein. But from the way Violent Avalanche spoke, it seemed like Violent Avalanche belonged to the group of wild gods who found it difficult if they lost their connection with the dragon vein. The dragon vein is extremely important then. Yes, I'm not trying to brag, but the reason why everyone can live in the wild lands is because of the sanctuary's existence that us wild gods look after. But if the dragon vein is destroyed, the sanctuary is also destroyed, and the wild lands will eventually become a land of death. Jude nodded his head. In fact, the wild lands that appeared in the game was a barren land that was uninhabitable for any living beings. But I think they're trying to do something worse. They're not turning it into a land of deaths. Yes, they tried to contaminate the dragon vein. Rather than destroying it, it seemed like they were trying to use the dragon vein for something bad. You're right, come to think of it, you've said it before, right? If the dragon vein is contaminated and corrupted, you'll also be corrupted. At Cordelia's words, Violent Avalanche nodded with a gloomy face. And in the midst of this serious talk, Jude looked at Cordelia, as if he found her talking to be something unexpected. Cordelia would usually be silent when Jude was talking to someone else, because she didn't know much about their discussion, but now she was listening to the conversation and even responding well to it. Her skill to naturally lead the conversation was also good. It doesn't seem like she's thinking about it. She was just doing it naturally. In fact, I've been talking more ever since I met her too. Remembering when he first began playing Legend of Heroes 2, Jude was almost preoccupied with his past memories for a while, but he soon shook his head and dismissed his thoughts. Their conversation with Violent Avalanche was more important than his current thoughts now. As they polluted the dragon vein, I also began feeling strange. I desperately resisted, and if you two hadn't come, I would have definitely lost my reason and become a crazy monster. Violent Avalanche shook its head, as if just imagining it was horrible. Cordelia stroked Violent Avalanche's back as she looked at Jude. You have a rough idea about it, right? Yes, I think I know what happened. After he roughly matched the story in Legend of Heroes 2, and in their current situation, he arrived at a conclusion. What Zarakul poured into the dragon vein was Belial's blood. Of course, it wasn't literally Belial's blood, but the sacrifice's blood that was infused with Belial's power through a special ceremony. Violent Avalanche, it seems that they're intending to corrupt the entire wild lands by corrupting the dragon vein and the wild gods. At Jude's words, Violent Avalanche shuddered. Indeed, it's a horrible situation. They must be stopped. Yes, they must be stopped, and in order to that, Violent Avalanche's help is absolutely necessary. My help? Yes, that's right, we really need your help. Violent Avalanche was embarrassed for a moment when Cordelia pleaded in an earnest tone, but it soon sprang up from its seat and said, Okay, I will do what I can. Thank you very much. Cordelia responded again and then turned to Jude. But what kind of help are you going to ask? The person near the ink will become black. She had impulsively scammed Violent Avalanche. Jude felt guilty for a while because he felt like he had led the innocent Cordelia astray, but he soon focused on Violent Avalanche and said, The demon followers have already corrupted the Angry Bull tribe and made them their subordinates. Therefore, we need to isolate the Angry Bull tribe. The Angry Bull tribe, they are one of the largest and strongest tribes in the wild land. Yes, so we have to stop them now. You could say that this current situation alone has revealed the plot of these guys. Plot? Yes, they're not only plotting to corrupt the dragon vein. They're also trying to corrupt the sanctuaries and the wild gods, and even the tribes that live in the wild land. What? The dragon veins are contaminated, and the sanctuaries are destroyed. Because of that, the tribes will find it difficult to live here. However, even the wild gods whom they have believed and depended on until now are also in a strange situation. The minds of the tribe's people, who will have no place to lean on, will be weakened, and the enemies will penetrate through those weakened gaps. They will incorporate the tribes into the Angry Bull tribe that is already under the control of the demon followers and turn the entire wild land into a den of demons. Oh my gosh, that's evil. Those bastards are truly evil. Violent Avalanche trembled as it found that situation scary. Jude then said as he grabbed the small and round shoulders of such Violent Avalanche. Yes, so they must be stopped. We must tell the truth to each tribe in the wild land and then isolate the Angry Bull tribe. The reason why the Angry Bull tribe invaded the northern part of the Len Kingdom was because they unified the wild land. Therefore, the two had to prevent them from completely unifying the wild land. Or rather, the two had to isolate them. How should I do it? What should I do? You must go the Great Storm tribe first and tell them the truth. Everyone will listen because it's a wild god's words and not anyone else. Ooh, so I have to leave my sanctuary then. Although it had collapsed, more than half of the rocky mountain was still left. Despite that, it was still Violent Avalanche's sanctuary. Violent Avalanche, this is a very serious situation. You're the only whom we can trust and rely on right now. Cordelia spoke in a serious tone with tears in her eyes, and Violent Avalanche groaned as it found that to be difficult to do. It was a slightly better situation for the wild god to leave and abandon their sanctuary, which is the source of their power, than to ignore the situation and die. What if someone else occupies this mountain while I'm gone? At Violent Avalanche's hesitation, Cordelia clasped its hands and said, It's okay, we'll help you if a thief takes over your land. We'll drive the thief away and get your mountain back together. Yes, Great Storm will also help you. If Great Storm was here, he would have said, Why should I? But he wasn't here, so he wouldn't have the chance to say that. Ooh, I see, I'll do it. I will go to the Great Storm tribe and inform them of the Angry Bull tribe's evil plot. You're so cool, Violent Avalanche is the best. Cordelia tightly hugged Violent Avalanche, and Violent Avalanche bashfully smiled. No, Violent Avalanche didn't openly smile, but it was obvious that it liked Cordelia's actions. Because a beautiful woman is a treasure of the world. Jude giggled before he immediately brought out the next topic. Violent avalanche, do you know where the great storm tribe lives? I know it roughly, but not where that great storm brat lives. That's a relief. I wish you a quick and safe journey. Yes, thank you. Wait, you wish me, aren't we going together? When Violent Avalanche widely opened its eyes and asked, Cordelia also looked at Jude. Jude said as he nodded his head, Yes, I'm sorry to say this, but I think it's better if you go alone to the Great Storm Tribe. Then what about you two? We intend to stop their plot. Violent Avalanche, do you know other wild god sanctuaries that are connected to the Dragon Vein here, excluding Great Storm? That Gentle Snow Breezes Sanctuary can be found northeast of the basin here. We are thinking of going there. If they're really trying to corrupt the entire Dragon Vein, the other sanctuaries are also in danger. What he said made sense. Moreover, Jude and Cordelia had one more reason to move. It's Lena. They had to reach the place where Lena's death event took place. Although they still had time to spare, it wasn't wasteful to have too much time. It takes about 2 days to return to the Great Storm Tribe. A round trip would take about 4 days. Cordelia roughly guessed Jude's thoughts and asked with a glance, Will it be okay? It will be okay. We didn't encounter any danger while on our way here. Furthermore, Violent Avalanche was a wild god despite being weakened. Violent Avalanche would surely be able to find the sanctuary of another wild god. Violent Avalanche, please. I understand. I will go to the Great Storm Tribe alone. Violent Avalanche nodded as it made up its mind, and Jude bowed again before he asked, Can you tell me more about the location of Gentle Snow Breezes Sanctuary? No problem, I have a map that I kept in the past. Violent Avalanche sat on the ground again and dug the ground, and suddenly, a map appeared from the ground. Like the freezing stone earlier, it seemed to be Violent Avalanche's magic skill. Here, take it. Thank you. Their conversation was over. They had no time to waste because they had to save the wild land. I'll be going then. Yes, I look forward to seeing you again later. I'll see you later. Violent Avalanche waved its hand to the polite Jude and Cordelia, who waved her hand too, before it quickly began to descend the rocky mountain. Cordelia spoke after looking at the back of such Violent Avalanche for quite some time. Will Violent Avalanche be okay? Violent Avalanche will be okay. Wait, you don't have a good feeling. Jude trusted Cordelia's intuition. Jude asked in a panic as he thought that it was more serious than he had thought, but Cordelia pondered for a moment before she shrugged her shoulders. No, it's not to the point where I have a bad feeling, I'm just worried. Violent Avalanche will be fine then. Even if Violent Avalanche looks like that, it is an old wild god who has lived for hundreds of years. The relieved Jude asked Cordelia again. Well then, let's just rest here for today and leave in the early morning tomorrow. Yes, but I really want to wash myself a little. Is there anything like a hot spring here? How about gathering the snow together and melting it with a fireball? If it feels like the water is cooling down, then add another fireball in. At Jude's words, Cordelia widely opened her eyes and soon clenched her fists as she snorted. It is possible. It was not something that couldn't be done. Cordelia would do more than that just for a bath. Yes, anyway, let's find a place where we will sleep first. We also have to eat something. Okay, I'm hungry. I'll cook the meal right away as soon as we find the right place. Is it beef jerky boiled in hot water again? My princess, didn't I say that you shouldn't be picky? No, F*CK. I'm a picky eater, so try increasing the number of side dishes, okay? I'll try. Really? Cordelia asked as she blinked her eyes, and Jude nodded once before he began taking the lead. Both of them had a hard time today, so he thought that having something special from the little food they saved would be fine. Good, we can go like this. Jude looked back towards Violent Avalanche's direction before he hurriedly moved forward again. Chapter 69, Episode 69, MISSED 2. There were more than a dozen tribes in the wild land, of which 4 tribes were particularly strong. The Angry Bull tribe was made up of powerful warriors. The Great Storm tribe lived with the wind and pursued harmony with nature. The Silent Wolf tribe produced outstanding hunters for generations. The Red Moon tribe was a tribe of shamans full of mystery. Among the 4 tribes, the Angry Bull tribe had been expanding in recent years. By subduing and uniting the surrounding tribes with force, the power of the tribe had doubled, even though it had only been a few months since their expansion began. For the Angry Bull tribe. For the great chief 7 Horns. The tribes living in the wild lands had their own wild gods, but not all of the wild gods were strong enough to build their own sanctuary. Moreover, Angry Bull, the wild god of the Angry Bull tribe, was one of the most powerful gods among the wild gods. However, the wild god in this village was someone who did not properly build a sanctuary, so there was no way for her to resist the enemies. "Ah, my children, my children!" A wild god in the form of a girl with small horns on her head cried out as she saw the burning village, but it was already useless. Now that most of her power had already been sealed, she was no better than an ordinary girl. "Divine punishment will befall you. The Golden Dragon King will punish you." Noisy. Sharp Horn, a warrior of the Angry Bull tribe, kicked the enraged wild god and didn't stop there. He violently grabbed the girl's golden hair to lift her head, and then swung his fist that was bigger than the girl's face several times. Ugh! The wild god girl couldn't even scream in front of the brutal violence that she faced, and eventually, Sharp Horn kicked the girl and told the warriors around him, "Take her away, make her aware of the situation." "We understand." The warriors of the Angry Bull tribe had already been corrupted. For them who had forgotten their respect for the wild gods, the girl in front of them was not a being they should worship and respect, but just a toy that they could play with as they please. As his subordinates dragged the wild god girl away, Sharp Horn wiped the blood off his hands and headed to the place where a large flag was erected in the middle of their main camp. It was to seek an audience to the powerful being who sealed the power of the wild god itself. "We captured the wild god and killed the chieftain. As you had instructed, the warriors are capturing everyone alive, even if they are injured." Inside the large tent made of animal skin, Sharp Horn sat down on both knees and paid homage. "I see you did well, Sharp Horn, you didn't disappoint me again. It is all thanks to Hurricane." In a gracious voice, Sharp Horn bowed his head again in courtesy. Ever since the appearance of the being in front of him, the prophet Hurricane, the Angry Bull tribe had changed. They had become much more powerful and richer as a result of their continuous war of conquest. And the same went for Sharp Horn, who had changed a lot too. Originally, Sharp Horn wasn't a very strong warrior, because he was born with a weak body. But Hurricane changed everything. He made the body of Sharp Horn to be big and strong, and also made Sharp Horn into one of the most powerful warriors in the Angry Bull tribe. Therefore, Sharp Horn deeply respected Hurricane. He considered as the truth the story of Hurricane about the wild gods being false gods, that they were just beasts with a little strong power. "You may go, we'll have to leave for a new land tomorrow." "Yes, Master Hurricane, please make yourself comfortable." Sharp Horn bowed his head again and politely left, and Hurricane, who was finally alone, frowned. How bothersome. He wasn't talking about Sharp Horn. Hurricane was satisfied with Sharp Horn's loyalty. To begin with, he deliberately made the weak to be powerful in order to elicit a sense of loyalty to him like Sharp Horn did just now. What touched his nerves was the sad news that he heard from far away. Zarakal. He lost his connection with the mid-ranking demonic human of the Devil's Eye. It was obvious then that Zarakal was dead. What happened? Hurricane had the appearance of an old man who grew a long and white beard, but this wasn't his true appearance in the first place. He thought as his compound eyes, where a human's eyes should be, blinked. Violent Avalanche's sanctuary. Violent Avalanche wasn't as weak as the wild god of the tribe that they had captured today. It didn't have a tribe that it looked after, so no one worshipped Violent Avalanche, but at the same time, it didn't necessarily mean that Violent Avalanche's power was weak. Despite living alone, Violent Avalanche wasn't weak. Rather, it was one of the wild gods on the strong side. However, Hurricane never thought that Zarakal would fail. Because he gave Zarakal a group of powerful warriors who would remain after they subdued Violent Avalanche. But what happened? Who killed Zarakal? It wasn't Violent Avalanche. If Violent Avalanche was the culprit, Zarakal's death would have been much faster. It was someone else. Someone else had killed Zarakal, who had gone to corrupt Violent Avalanche. Red Gale, the strongest warrior of the Great Storm tribe. But Hurricane soon shook his head. He clearly put Red Gale under the curse of the Blue Spider Lily. The closest one to him is Madga. Madga was a mid-ranking demonic human who attacked Gentle Snow Breeze, a powerful wild god. In fact, both Violent Avalanche and Gentle Snow Breeze were wild gods who lived far away from the home of the Angry Bull tribe, but the reason they took the trouble of attacking the two was because of the Great Storm tribe. They planned to corrupt the nearby wild gods and then isolate the Great Storm tribe. They needed to suppress the Great Storm tribe's power so that they couldn't hinder the Angry Bull tribe's actions. For now, I'll leave it to Madga. I must unify the northeast region of the Wildlands first. The Angry Bull tribe was located in the northeast region, and likewise, the Silent Wolf tribe was located in the northeast too. They needed to subdue that tribe too, so that they could advance towards their final goal. To pollute the dragon vein and corrupt the wild gods, and even turn the Golden Dragon King as our slave. The Golden Dragon King was the king of the wild gods. Hurricane organized his thoughts and then took out a crystal ball. He infused a large amount of mana on it in order to deliver his message to Madga, who was located far away from him. 3 days after leaving the Rocky Mountain, Violent Avalanche would have originally arrived at the Great Storm tribe's village at that time, but it still hadn't arrived there. The reason was simple. Sob, where the hell am I? After it descended from the Rocky Mountain, Violent Avalanche went straight towards the direction that Jude had told it. It had visited the Great Storm tribe once, though it may be a long time ago, so Violent Avalanche followed his memory of the way to get there. A day had passed. There was nothing but snow everywhere. Violent Avalanche didn't care much about it. This area was originally only a snowfield. If Violent Avalanche went straight ahead, it would eventually reach the village of the Great Storm tribe. Has Great Storm grown up a lot? Violent Avalanche warmly smiled as it recalled a little brat, and afterwards it continued walking. A day passed by again. There was still nothing but snow everywhere, and Violent Avalanche began to feel a little nervous. Strange. I should have arrived at this point. Great Storm would have come to meet me. Even the Great Storm tribe children would have come. The children referred here is not literally kids' children. The wild gods referred to the tribe's humans as children, so Violent Avalanche was referring to the Great Storm tribe as children. Are they busy? In fact, there was one more reason that was more likely than them being busy, but Violent Avalanche tried to ignore it and continued walking. And a day passed by again. At the present. Where is this place? Where am I? It was only today that Violent Avalanche, who had been living in the Rocky Mountains for hundreds of years, finally realized. The fact that Violent Avalanche itself was bad at directions. What do I do? What should I do? It was a body clone, and not its main body. Moreover, Violent Avalanche was weak before it left its sanctuary, so its divine power was even more weak now that it has left its sanctuary. If Violent Avalanche had its main body, it would be able to fly with his magic power or contact Great Storm. And even if it can't do that, Violent Avalanche would still be able to detect the presence of Great Storm and follow that direction. But that was all impossible for the current Violent Avalanche. The Violent Avalanche now was just a talking bear cub, and it was a very far existence from the great wild god it once was in the past. Ooh, I'm hungry after hundreds of years. Actually, Violent Avalanche had been hungry for the past 2 days. When Violent Avalanche was in its sanctuary, breathing alone was enough to sate its hunger, but now that it had left its sanctuary, Violent Avalanche had become hungry as if it was a real bear cub. Sob, I hate seeing the snow now. Violent Avalanche didn't feel full even if it ate the snow. But the only thing that it could eat right away was snow. Violent Avalanche sobbed and burst into tears. And at that very moment, Hey! At the moment Violent Avalanche felt a chill, Violent Avalanche raised its head, because it sharply felt a stabbing sensation on its back. No way. Violent Avalanche swallowed his breath, looked back, and soon found the reason why. The moment Violent Avalanche met its eyes, the Frost Wolf gave up its stealthy approach and began sprinting. Bark, bark. The Frost Wolf even barked. If it was Violent Avalanche's main body, the Frost Wolf would have been beaten with one fist, but now it was a strong enemy that the current Violent Avalanche couldn't fight against. The quick-witted Violent Avalanche began to run in vain. Ow! Ah! The surroundings were filled with the sounds of howls and cries. Violent Avalanche ran hard, but because it was a bear cub, its legs were too short. Its distance from the Frost Wolf was quickly reduced. Spare the wild god, spare the wild god. Violent Avalanche desperately shouted and rolled over the ground at some point. Violent Avalanche had tripped over a small rock that it didn't notice because it was covered in snow. Ah! Violent Avalanche rolled over the ground and eventually lied down in exhaustion. The Frost Wolf howled and jumped over the head of Violent Avalanche. With a single leap, it reached Violent Avalanche and pressed down on Violent Avalanche's chest. Ow! Ah! The Frost Wolf exhaled and drew its face closer. Drool spilled in between its sharp teeth, and Violent Avalanche struggled hard, but it was useless. Am I going to die like this? If it had known that this would happen, Violent Avalanche would have chosen to die at its sanctuary. No, I cannot die now. Violent Avalanche couldn't die. Violent Avalanche had a noble mission to deliver the news about the dangers that would befall the wild lands. Hey, ha! Violent Avalanche began to struggle again, but it was only for a short time. As the Frost Wolf stepped harder on the chest, its claws dug into the skin of Violent Avalanche. Ah! It hurt so much. Violent Avalanche couldn't stand it anymore and finally screamed. Help me, alas, help me. It was the last cry. The Frost Wolf didn't waste its time and widely opened its mouth. And a flame went straight into its mouth. Boom! It was an explosion. The fireball that entered the Frost Wolf's mouth exploded. It was a magic that was terrifyingly precise. The fireball entering the Frost Wolf's mouth was not a coincidence, but something intended. Moreover, the adjustment of magic power was precise. The Frost Wolf was instantly killed from the fireball's explosion, but the damage never went out of its body. The Frost Wolf had its throat and intestines burned, and it collapsed after a single groan. Violent Avalanche blinked its eyes as it realized that its life was saved. Violent Avalanche stood up from its spot while roughly exhaling. Who is it? No, who are you? When Violent Avalanche looked at the direction where the fireball came from, it saw a man and woman. Because of that, Violent Avalanche had a thought. They came to look for me. Jude and Cordelia. The two had saved me again. Cordelia. It was the moment when Violent Avalanche cried out in joy. It's not human. Don't attack it. I know because it gave us a clue. The voices came from the man and woman. The voices were different, but it resembled the voices of the crazy couple, Jude and Cordelia. Now that Violent Avalanche saw them, the color of their hair and their appearance were also different. The woman was pretty. She looked like Cordelia. But her hair was blonde and she had a fiercer impression. The man was handsome. He also looked like Jude. But his hair was blue, not black. The color of his eyes was also blue, not green. He's also much bigger. Violent Avalanche blinked its eyes as soon as it came to its senses. While Violent Avalanche was thinking about on what to do, the two people in front of him approached at a terrifying pace towards him, so Violent Avalanche raised its arms high. Wait, I'm not an enemy. A talking bear cub, how cute. No, it's not the time for this. The blonde woman, Adelia, who came close to Violent Avalanche, shook her head once to drive away her thoughts, and then asked, threatening Violent Avalanche with the short cane that she was holding in her hand. Who are you? What is your relationship with Cordelia? Have you met her? Her eyes looked like she would kill Violent Avalanche right away, depending on the answer. Violent Avalanche unconsciously flinched and urgently replied. I am the wild god Violent Avalanche. Me and Cordelia are friends. Wild god, friend. Adelia looked at Violent Avalanche sharply. She knew little about the land of barbarians, but this was the first time she had heard of the existence of wild gods. And Gar-El spoke. Violent Avalanche, who was Lady Cordelia with? What is the name of the person she was with? The handsome man, Gar-El, spoke, but his eyes were terrifying, even more so when Violent Avalanche realized that he had pulled out his sword. Violent Avalanche unconsciously stepped backwards and fell on its back before it quickly said, Jude and Cordelia, the crazy couple. Violent Avalanche closed its eyes and curled its body as much as possible, and Gar-El and Adelia looked back at each other. It seems to be correct. I don't agree with the words, crazy couple. I don't too. Crazy couple, wasn't those some rude words to describe their younger siblings? Gar-El and Adelia found it strange that those words somehow seemed to be correct, and they unconsciously exchanged smiles, but soon after, the two cleared their throats and turned towards Violent Avalanche. Gar-El opened his mouth first. We won't hurt you, please open your eyes. It was definitely a more friendly voice than before. Violent Avalanche carefully opened its eyes and saw Gar-El and Adelia. After sniffing with its nose once, Violent Avalanche was convinced. They're the relatives of Jude and Cordelia. Perhaps they're their older brother and older sister. Because they smelled almost the same as the two. You said you were Violent Avalanche, right? I'm Gar-El Bayer, this is Lady Adelia Chase. Instead of following up Gar-El's introduction, Adelia stared at Violent Avalanche with fierce eyes, and Violent Avalanche flinched again and looked at Gar-El as it courageously said, Are you Jude and Cordelia's older brother and older sister? Yes, we came all the way here to look for the two. Do you know where the two are now? His voice was still friendly, but Gar-El stared sharply at Violent Avalanche again. Because of that, Violent Avalanche gulped in nervousness before it stood up and replied, I know, the two left to help Gentle Snow Breeze. Gentle Snow Breeze, what do you mean by they left to help? Adelia's eyes were still fierce, but Violent Avalanche understood it now. Adelia was worried about Cordelia. She was by no means an evil person. It's a long story, it's not something I can say in a moment, but to tell you one thing in advance, Jude and Cordelia are trying to save the wild lands from the threat of demons. At Violent Avalanche's words, Gar-El and Adelia looked at each other. It wasn't as much as their younger siblings, but after traveling together for more than 10 days, the two could somehow understand the thoughts of each other. You think there's something going on? I don't think it's a simple runaway. Gar-El turned his eyes to Violent Avalanche again. Okay, we'll listen to your story. Wait, before that I have a condition, no, a request. Request, have you forgotten that we saved your life? Violent Avalanche flinched when Adelia sharply retorted. Gar-El spoke as he tried to dissuade Adelia from lifting her magic wand. Tell us. We have to go to the Great Storm Tribe. Take me to them. I'll tell you the story of Jude and Cordelia on the way, and you need to go to the village of the Great Storm Tribe anyway if you want to get the directions. Because Violent Avalanche didn't know where it currently was. Gar-El slowly nodded his head. Okay, let's do that. Will it be okay? It's a better option, this is an unknown place for us as well. Gar-El quietly whispered to her ear so that only Adelia would hear it, before he spoke again to Violent Avalanche. We will accept your offer. Thank you. Violent Avalanche breathed a sigh of relief and stretched its shoulders, and Adelia looked down at Violent Avalanche as she folded her arms. She was shouting that it was cute in her mind, but she still spoke in a cold voice. We don't have time, hurry up and begin guiding us, and start talking too. Since it had spoken about the threat of demons, Jude and Cordelia could be in danger at this very moment. Violent Avalanche replied hesitantly to Adelia's urging. That. Do you know where this is first? I got lost. Violent Avalanche said as it shrank in shame, and Gar-El and Adelia looked at each other. And at the same time, in a completely different place. I'll entrust it to you. Just trust me. After he bid farewell to Count Bayer, Count Chase flew into the sky with his hands full of luggage. He was headed towards the north. It was in the direction where his 2 daughters and the others were. TN, the title of this chapter, is missed, but in Korean, it is a verb that specifically means to miss each other on the way. A longer one would be to fail to meet each other because their directions or timings of passing a certain point are different from each other. The title was a bit spoilerish, so I just left it as missed. Chapter 70, Episode 70, Gentle Snow Breeze, 1. Terms used in this chapter. Ondol, a Korean form of underfloor heating that uses direct heat transfer from wood smoke to the underside of a thick masonry floor. Sowaking, Korean slang that literally means little but certain happiness. It refers to the small little happiness which one can get very easily in their daily lives. For example, eating one's favorite dessert after a long day's work. It may be something that is small little, but it certainly makes one happy. Ajasi, Korean word for uncle, but also used to refer to an older man who is within your parents' generation. Around the time when violent avalanche went down alone the rocky mountain and headed on the wrong path, Jude and Cordelia were preparing to rest after they had found a suitable place to stay for the night. Only when you have a good floor can you sleep well. Cordelia nodded her head several times as if responding to her own words, and she made a bed by using dig magic and the witch's power. After having dug the ground a meter or so from the surface, she flattened the ground. She then used the wooden board as a roof to cover the place, and cast heat magic so that they could spend a warm night. Should I place a flat and large stone and then cover it with dirt? Wouldn't it be completely like an ondol if I heated the stone with magic? Stone bed, long live the stone bed. Cordelia hummed as she worked on the bed before she turned to the side. Jude was cooking over the campfire, and the smell was quite good. Jude, what's for dinner? It's beef jerky porridge, madam. He put some chopped beef jerky in the hot water and then added some of the grains he saved. Afterwards, he seasoned it with salt. It was a simple meal, but Cordelia kept drooling because she had been working hard on preparing their sleeping place. It looks delicious. It is delicious, I made it after all. HMPH, I look forward to it. Despite Jude's impudence, Cordelia was already used to it now. She hummed a little more, and then nodded her head after she covered the newly made bed with a waterproof cloth. Good, it's well made. The size of the waterproof cloth was not so wide, but it was enough for 2 people to lie down on. Are you done? Yes, I'm done. What about our meal? I'm also done cooking. I'm excited. Cordelia danced with a slight wiggle of her hips before she rushed to Jude's side, and Jude involuntarily laughed. Why are you laughing? Because what you did was cute. HMPH, don't you know Sowaking? Little but certain happiness. People need happiness whether it's big or small. Little but certain happiness. Although it was lamentable that the happiness of the incomparably beautiful girl and esteemed daughter of Count Chase, one of the 12 northern families, was the food that they were going to eat this day, Jude agreed with Cordelia's opinion itself. You're right, little but certain happiness is important. Yes, that's right. Perhaps because Jude agreed with her immediately, Cordelia felt better and swallowed a spoonful of the jerky porridge that Jude passed on to her. How is it? Delicious. It was hot so she couldn't speak properly, but Cordelia had a contented smile, and Jude also began eating. But Jude. Yes, madam. First of all, we saved Red Gale Argosy. Yes, we did. The curse won't get any worse now. So what's our next plan? Cordelia roughly knew of their plan in the wild lands. As they had said while convincing Violent Avalanche, their immediate task was to prevent the angry Bull tribe from unifying the barbarians. But this was not enough. She needed a detailed plan. First, we need to create an Eastern alliance that is centered on Red Gale, to fight against Seven Horns and the angry Bull tribe. Well, seeing that they've already reached this place, it's likely that they've already moved in the western region of the Wild Lands. It would be stupid for them to send a military expedition in this faraway place when they haven't organized and conquered the surrounding tribes near them first. Cordelia also nodded as if she understood it. What's next? We should rally the wild gods of the eastern region too. The devil's eye would have killed or corrupted the wild gods of the western region. Now that I think about it, it seems like Violent Avalanche was one of the enemies in the game. Violent Avalanche. Yes, do you remember the undead bear that appeared in the middle of Act 2? It had an awful knockback attack. I remember, right, come to think of it, they looked a bit similar. As Jude had said, the bear was in an undead state, so it was literally half-rotten when it appeared, but now that they thought about it, that bear seemed to be Violent Avalanche. To confront the corrupted wild gods, we also need the help of other wild gods. Moreover, we have to fight against the devil's eye. You're right, mid-ranking demonic humans are already too much for us, so we'll be unable to come up with a solution if a high-ranking demonic human appears too. It was almost impossible for the power of the current Jude and Cordelia to defeat high-ranking demonic humans. So their plan was to let those who can deal with those enemies to be on their side. Of course, the best thing that we could do is for the two of us to become stronger. Jude and Cordelia's levels were already considerably higher than when they first entered the wild lands. Moreover, both Jude and Cordelia still had plenty of room for growth. Because the ninth heaven's 9 doors is still just at the second door. Furthermore, once we meet Lena and obtain the angelic blood, Cordelia would be able to use the ancestral regression technique. Cordelia's fallen angel mode that he wished to see would then be possible. I'm looking forward to it. Jude briefly imagined the appearance of Cordelia's awakening as a fallen angel, and Cordelia slapped Jude on the back. Oh, why? No, I feel like you're thinking of something insidious. Anyway, what is it? Were you really thinking of something insidious? Instead of answering, Jude diverted the conversation to another topic. Redgale is both a powerful warrior and shaman too. If it's only a curse, he'd be able to deal with 7 horns. Don't change the topic. Cordelia stared at Jude for a while, but it was only for a moment. She soon joined Jude's conversation. There must be strong men among the warriors and chieftains of the other tribes, right? I guess so. There must be some wild gods who specialized in fighting too. And Lena. Yes, Lena. She was one of the 5 main characters in the first episode of Legend of Heroes. It was highly unlikely that she was on the same level as Landius and Camille, whose strength were already beyond this world, but her strength would still be really powerful. If I knew where she is right now, I would have gone running immediately. Cordelia said as her shoulders drooped, and Jude nodded as he agreed with her. Because there are many hidden mysteries regarding Lena's death. Lena's death in Legend of Heroes 2 was shown in a cinematic movie. However, the problem was not that it appeared in accordance with the story of the main character, but the fact that a cinematic movie unexpectedly appeared at a certain time. Because we only know the place and time. In fact, the location itself was unclear, but some of the rotten waters of Legend of Heroes 2 estimated the location based on the background from the cinematic movie. Raptor Canyon. Lena died there. So they had to arrive there in advance and stop Lena's death. Raptor Canyon is in the north of the eastern part of the Wild Lands, right? Yes, so it's close to the Argon Empire. Carrara, one of the playable characters from the Wild Lands, left the Wild Land at the beginning of the game and ran away at night towards the Argon Empire, and Raptor Canyon was along the route she took. It's not that we are pressed for time, but it's rather tight. We have no choice but to leave the establishment of the Eastern Alliance to Red Gale and Violent Avalanche. Of course, we can invite the Eastern tribes that we meet on our way to our destination. How do we do that? This or that? HMPH, you scammer. Cordelia stuck out her tongue, but her eyes were smiling. She was already skilled in helping Jude with his scams. It's fallen. She hasn't become a fallen angel yet, but she's already been corrupted. But somehow, Jude unconsciously felt proud. Anyway, let's wash and sleep after we've finished eating. I want to take a bath. The idea of making a hot spring and taking a bath was still a bit unreasonable. Therefore, Cordelia wiped her face and neck clean with water that was made by melting the snow before she lied down. I had a hard time today again. Have a good rest. Yes, you too. That was it. Cordelia fell into deep sleep right away, and Jude laughed in admiration at that before he covered her with a blanket. The next morning, Jude and Cordelia left early as they followed the map given by Violent Avalanche and proceeded to the northeast, where Gentle Snow Breeze's sanctuary was located. Cordelia couldn't tell where they were because of the snow everywhere, but there was no hesitation in her steps. Because the almighty Jude Wiki was by her side. Jude Wiki, we're going in the right direction, right? Yes, that's right. Jude had already packed a compass from the very beginning when they left home. At the time when Violent Avalanche was lost in the snowfield, Jude and Cordelia steadily moved towards the right direction. Thus, one more day passed. By the third day around lunchtime, Jude and Cordelia beheld the sanctuary of Gentle Snow Breeze with their eyes. The sanctuary of Gentle Snow Breeze was in a large basin, but it was actually very easy to recognize even without the basin. This is because of the sudden change in environment by just arriving near that area. There's no snow. They had been in a snowfield up until now, but there was no snow from a certain area, as if a line had been drawn. Although the weather was also chilly, the weather was at least like autumn. It couldn't even compare to other places that were extreme enough like Frost Anvil. Is this the power of a wild god? It was the reason why the barbarians can live in the wild lands. The vast field was full of green vegetation. It seemed that farming, as well as raising livestock, was possible here. Cordelia was briefly fascinated by the landscape that suddenly changed, but at some point she raised her head. They're fighting. It was as she said. As they climbed up the low hill, they saw the entrance to the basin beyond the wide field. There were hundreds of people fighting around the village walls. Jude and Cordelia automatically lowered their positions before they grasped the situation of the battlefield. The ones attacking the wall were monsters and people who wore helmets that have horns on it, and the attacking side's troops were 3 times stronger than the defensive side. They won't last long. It was as Cordelia said. The defending side was holding on quite well, but it was visible that they were struggling. If they had arrived an hour late, they would have seen a wall that had already been collapsed. But what should they do? Should the two rush alone towards the hundreds of soldiers? I have an idea, Jude said, and a smile spread over Cordelia's face. Madga, a mid-ranking demonic human of the Devil's Eye, looked at the battlefield with cold eyes. The warriors of the Angry Bull tribe were wagging an onslaught with monsters that they summoned from hell. Thanks to the spear of corruption that Hurricane received from Belial, Gentle Snow Breeze couldn't properly use her strength. This is because the spear of corruption was stuck in the dragon vein and suppressed the divine power of Gentle Snow Breeze. Of course, the defending troops were doing all they can to support the warriors that were working hard to remove the spear of corruption, but it was useless in the first place. The number of tribesmen who worshipped Gentle Snow Breeze was small. Although each and every one of them were strong warriors, the Angry Bull tribe was the most powerful group of warriors in the entire wild land. They were even strengthened by the power of Belial, and their number was 3 times that of the Gentle Snow Breeze tribe, so it was hard for the defending side to overcome it. It's only a matter of time. They have endured well, but it was over now. After destroying the walls and annihilating the tribe of Gentle Snow Breeze, they would capture the wild god. Break it, kill them, destroy them. There was power in Madga's words, as she wore the bones of a beast on her head, rather than a helmet. As a shaman, her body was filled with patterns drawn with colored paint, and an evil power shook from the skeleton staff she held in his hand. Madga closed her eyes and smiled. She savored the current situation, as if she was tasting delicacies. I'm different from that stupid Zarakol. Zarakol had failed his mission to capture Violent Avalanche, even though it didn't have a tribe. He was a stupid bastard. But Madga didn't hate him. Zarakol was already dead, and because of his major failure, Madga had another chance to contribute for herself. The day I'll become a high-ranking demonic human is not far away. The goals of the demonic humans of the Devil's Eye were all the same. To get closer to Belial. After becoming a high-ranking demonic human, the path to becoming a demon prince, a superior demon, would also open. Madga smiled as she imagined the future that was still far away, but she would surely achieve. But suddenly, she heard the screams of the angry bull tribe. Huh! Master Madga! Madga hurriedly opened her eyes to the cries of the startled warriors. There was no significant change in front of her. The bloody warriors of the gentle Snow Breeze tribe and the almost destroyed walls were just as it was before. But things have changed. Neither the attacking side nor the defending side were fighting. Everyone looked at the same place with the same stunned faces. At the direction everyone was looking at. Madga turned and she saw. Crazy. Raging waves of fire were moving forward and burning the whole field. A huge and fierce wildfire was attacking their backs.